Chapter 151 Head Hunting. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Some time later, they were standing in front of a makeshift cabin. Just like Changing Star's patchwork dwelling, the cabin was constructed out of mismatched stone blocks that had been scavenged from the ruins. It was reinforced with monster hides here and there and seemed to be built slightly better than the rest of the hovels in the outer settlement. There was a large bestial skull hung above the door, its thick forehead split apart by a devastating strike of some sharp weapon. Glancing at the skull, Nephi took a step forward and knocked on the door. However, no response followed. Sunny sighed. Maybe she's not home. Instead of an answer, Changing Star frowned and banged on the door with her first. The first strike was somewhat gentle, but by the last, the bestial skull was on the verge of flying off the wall. A sleepy and irritated voice sounded from the inside. I swear to gods, whoever you are, you'd better be a nightmare creature. A few moments later, Sunny heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door. Before it opened, though, Nephi suddenly spoke. Sunny, turn away. Hearing a strange urgency in her voice, he scowled and did as she had asked. Your shadow, too. What is going on? Are we expecting trouble? As he was staring away from the cabin, the creaking of wood informed him that the door was flung open. Who the hell is, oh? It's you. He swore he could hear Neff's teeth grinding against each other. A few seconds later, Changing Star spoke, her tone especially flat. Put on a memory, Effie. Please. Wait, what? Why would she, oh? Oh. When he was finally allowed to turn back, the last glimmers of ethereal light were yet to disappear from the fabric of Effie's provocatively short chiton. She wasn't wearing anything underneath either. Here. Better. The huntress was exactly the same as the last time he had seen her, tall, strong, and brimming with vitality. Without the bronze cuirass with leather terrages, as well as other elements of the archaic armor, even more of HEW dewy olive skin could be seen. So, you guys are back together, huh? Judging by how clean and shiny the other two look, I'm guessing that their stay in the castle was pleasant. Sunny glanced at Cassie, then said in a reserved tone. Not particularly. Just like you said, the ambience there is, well, an acquired taste, I guess. Effie grinned. Well said. Anyway, how can I help you? Changing Star motioned at the door. Can we come inside? The unruly huntress glanced back, then shrugged. Sure. Why not? Inside, the cabin was small and cozy. One of its corners was occupied by a large pile of furs that served Effie as a bed. At first glance, it didn't seem that lavish, but once it hit Sunny that each of the furs had come from the corpse of a nightmare creature, he quickly changed his mind. That was probably the most extravagant thing he had ever seen. Also, one could only imagine what went on between those furs. Pure thoughts, Sunny. Focus. There was also a fireplace, a table with a single wooden chair, and a pair of sturdy chests. The rest of the space was occupied by various curios that the huntress had scavenged from the ruins over the years. There was no particular logic to this opulent collection except for the fact that each object had once caught her fancy for this reason or that. After the three of them were seated, Effie returned to her pile of furs, wrapped herself in one of them and asked. So, what's so important that you had to come and wake me up this early in the morning? Early in the morning. It's already noon. Nephi lingered for a few moments, then said. You haven't hunted since the day we met. Right. Effie yawned, then said in a languid tone. Nope. I'll go back into the ruins once my food runs out. Which will be in a day or two, I think. What, how? The amount of meat she had butchered off those monsters was enough to feed a person for a couple of months. It was all gone already. Just how much did the vigorous huntress eat? Changing Star nodded. When you do, come with us. Be our pathfinder. Well, she certainly doesn't beat around the bush. For some reason, Sunny had not expected Neff to be this direct. He had always imagined this conversation taking much longer before getting to its real purpose. Effie stared at them, then threw her head back and laughed out loud. Ah, that's a good one. Do you want me to be your nanny, too? When her laughter died down, she shook her head and said. No offense, kids, but you have just arrived in the Dark City. You are as green as it gets. Best hunters out here wanted me to become a part of their party, and I refused them all. Do you know why? Neff nodded with a serious expression. Most hunting parties share the spoils of their hunts. Each hunter keeps a part to eat and sells the rest to the people in the slum. But because of your flaw, you can't allow yourself to do the same. You need all the sustenance a hunt can provide. The more partners you have, the lesser your share will become, so, you hunt alone, and never sell the meat of your prey, just their hides. Effie smiled. I see someone has been doing their homework. Changing Star tilted her head a little and, not paying any attention to the irony in those words, continued. We can solve that problem by. However, the solitary huntress interrupted her. Stop. Good guess, but you are wrong. That is not why I refused all those hunters. Nephis blinked, surprised. After a long pause, she asked, a hint of confusion in her voice. Then, why? The smile disappeared from Effie's face. Because they are weak. Every one of them is weak. Even the most successful of them are. And do you know why? Something dark gleamed in her hazel eyes. They are weak because Gunlog will never allow anyone strong to exist outside of his control. So. I am not going to be your pathfinder. Sorry, princess. Changing Star froze, obviously flustered by that answer. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again and awkwardly pressed her lips together. No matter how much she had honed her social skills during their journey through the labyrinth, this conversation still seemed to be too much for her. In the ensuing silence, Sunny suddenly spoke, his voice calm and slightly provoking. He's allowing you to exist. Effie looked at him, raised one eyebrow with a smile, and didn't say anything. Finally, Nephis was able to compose herself. We might be new here, but we are not weak. Between the two of us, Sunny and I had killed dozens upon dozens of awakened creatures in the labyrinth. The huntress interrupted her once again. Even if that's true, that was there. Out here in the Dark City, things are very different. The two of them stared at each other, one with a relaxed smile on her lips, the other with stubborn flames burning in her eyes. Oh, I don't like this. Eventually, Changing Star grimaced and said. So, if we prove that we have strength, you might reconsider. Effie chuckled. Damn. You say it like it's easy. You do know how many people can't even step a foot into the ruins, right? If you guys survive in this hell for a few years, maybe then we can talk again. Nephis looked at her for a while, and then smiled darkly. We will talk again in the evening. Then, you will change your mind. Chapter 152 There and Back Again. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Outside, the sun was already moving past its zenith. There wasn't that much time left before the sunset, so Sunny was really unsure about what Nephis could do to change Effie's mind before evening. However, judging by the determined expression on her face, Changing Star wasn't just throwing words to the wind. She had something specific in mind. He hesitated. So, what exactly are we going to do now? Neff glanced at him, white flames dancing in the depths of her cold gray eyes. Then, she turned away and said. Follow me. With that, she walked forward in the direction of the castle. Castle. Why are we going to the castle? Somewhat uneasy, Sunny gently took Cassie by the arm and hurried to catch up to Nephis. When he did, she suddenly threw over her shoulder. Tell me about that Pathfinder again. The one who was accused of murder 3 days ago. Sunny frowned, then repeated what he knew about the guy. When he was almost finished, she asked. What's his aspect ability? He hesitated, then said. He can make any weapon become incredibly sharp when it's in his hands. Sharp enough to cut stone, maybe even steel. It's a very powerful combat ability. Changing Star was quiet for some time, then said. What about his flaw? Sunny shook his head. That I have no idea about. People are very protective of their flaws, you know. Not everyone goes around telling everyone about their greatest vulnerability like that lunatic, Effie. Cassie, who seemed to be very protective of him today, decided to support this claim. Sunny is right, Neff. We don't even know what his own flaw is, remember. Sunny almost stumbled and had to try very hard to not let any emotion show on his face. Cassie was right, of course. While Changing Star and she had shared their flaws with him, Sunny never reciprocated the gesture, for obvious reasons. That is true, but, can we not talk about that? Nephi silently nodded and didn't comment on it further. It seemed as though her mind was on something else. Phew. Soon, they scaled the magnificent stairs and were approaching the gates of the castle. Sunny was growing increasingly nervous about Neff's intentions. What is her plan, exactly? Neff. What do you need us to do? She shrugged, then said in her usual indifferent tone. You don't really need to do anything. Just follow me and try to look, virtuous. Look, virtuous. What does that supposed to mean? The guards standing watch in front of the gates blocked their path with contemptuous and suggestive looks in their eyes. Contempt was directed toward Sunny, while the rest was directed toward the girls, of course. Stop. What business do you have in the Bright Castle? Want to pay the tribute? Or maybe want to get paid, instead? If you know what I mean. Both of them laughed, making Sunny's blood boil. Nephi looked at them with a calm expression, then said. I want to go inside, but I'm not going to pay tribute. The laughter suddenly stopped. The guards looked at them with a bit of amusement, a harsh and dangerous light finding its way into their eyes. Have you lost your mind, wench? Why are you here if you're not going to pay tribute? Stop wasting our time. Changing Star stared at them with no emotion whatsoever showing on her beautiful ivory face. Then, she said evenly. I'm here to invoke the right of challenge. For a few seconds, everyone stayed silent. Sunny's heart was beating like a wild beast in his chest. Mad. She has gone mad. But no, Changing Star was not mad. Although Sunny liked to joke inwardly about how crazy Nephi was, she was anything but. In fact, her ability to remain cool-headed and rational in any situation was one of the main reasons that made her so dangerous. Which meant that there was some opportunity she saw here that he didn't. At least he hoped that this was the case. Meanwhile, one of the guards frowned. Stop joking around, little girl. Shut your mouth and get lost if you want to live. Neff didn't move. Instead, she said. I'm not joking. The other guard stared at her, then shook his head. Those slum rats have really all gone crazy, huh? I thought that this recent show would teach them a lesson, but it seems as though it did not. He sneered. Listen, lass. The right of challenge is not a laughing matter. It's a fight to the death. No one is going to go easy on you just because you have a pretty face. Do you understand? Changing Star simply nodded. The guard waited for a while, looking at her tall figure and the crude tunic that she wore. Then, he grimaced. I guess we'll have some entertainment today. Ugh, such a shame. With your looks, you could have lived in the castle without ever even needing to pay the tribute. Shaking his head, he turned around and gestured for the three of them to follow. The other guard stayed behind, a bewildered and darkly excited expression on his face. With the sound of the rusty chains swinging in the wind invading their ears, Sonny, Nephias and Cassie passed beneath the hanging skulls and entered the castle. Inside, everything was exactly the same. Even Harper was still sitting behind his opulent desk, writing something on a piece of parchment. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he raised his head and threw a furtive glance in their direction. An expression of confused surprise appeared in his eyes. Sunless and Kasha. What are you guys doing back here? Sonny felt the desire to palm his face. When he had said to the gaunt young man that they might see each other in the future, he certainly did not mean that that future would be on the same damn day. Not knowing about the thoughts raging in his head, Harper smiled. Oh. Did you guys get lucky and come into some shards? Back already to pay the tribute? Sonny gritted his teeth and forced out a weak smile. No. Not exactly. Chapter 153 Guiding Star. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. By the time the three of them were led to the grand hall of the castle, the news that there was going to be another challenge had yet to spread through the entire fortress. Because of that, there was no crowd there, just a few dozen people who had happened to walk past and heard the commotion. However, their number was growing with each minute. Standing before the entrance to the hall, Nephias was calmly looking forward, her thoughts a mystery. She seemed to be steady and collected. Sonny, on the other hand, was very nervous. Just what was Changing Star planning? Glancing around to make sure that no one could eavesdrop on their conversation, he leaned to her and whispered. You're not really going to fight one of Gunlog's lieutenants, are you? Because that would be suicide. No matter how talented and strong Neff was, she couldn't hope to win against someone like that, at least not before absorbing enough soul shards to even the odds at least a little. Those people had not gotten to where they were by pure accident, too. They had talents of their own. Nephias didn't turn her head and simply said. The walls have ears. Sonny gritted his teeth and was about to retort, at that moment, the guard that had led them inside appeared from the grand hall, threw a dark look at them, and spat. Come on in, fools. Changing Star simply walked forward, leaving Sonny and Cassie no choice but to follow. Inside the hall, a small crowd of people was staring at the entrance. When they saw Nephias, a wave of confused whispers ran through their ranks. Who is that? Never seen her before. There's something strange about that girl. The whole situation was much less ostentatious and theatrical than that on the day of Jubiai's death. Most of the lieutenants weren't even here, not to mention the Bright Lord himself. Only the leader of hunters, Gemma, was sitting on the steps leading up to the empty white throne. On his face, there was a slightly sullen expression. To Sonny's relief, Haruz was nowhere to be seen. When the guard led the three of them inside, Gemma raised his head and glanced in their direction with a frown. Did I hear it correctly? One of you three wants to invoke the right of challenge. Nephias took a step forward, looked him right in the eyes, and answered in her usual indifferent voice. I do. Her calmness was in direct contradiction with the heavy meaning behind those words. It was the polar opposite of the impassioned, scornful, furious speech of condemnation that Jubiai had given in this hall 3 days ago. The confused frown on Gemma's face deepened. You do know what that means, right, little girl? She continued to stare at him without showing any sign of fear, then repeated. I do. The tall hunter sighed. Listen, it is indeed true that anyone has the right to invoke the right of challenge. But throwing your life away is a really stupid thing to do. I'm sure that you had to suffer a lot to make it this far. Everyone here did, pretty much. So how about you think about it some more and reconsider? His voice wasn't unfriendly. In fact, it seemed sincere, as though Gunlog's lieutenant really did not want to see her die for no reason. However, his words fell on deaf ears. Neff just tilted her head a little and said. No need. Gemma sighed again, then shook his head. Fine, have it your way then. Who are you here to accuse? L.RG. Sunny already had the idea. That's why he wasn't surprised to hear her next words. I am here to accuse the Pathfinder known as Andal. Andal was the person whose crime had led to Jubiai's challenge, and then death. As another wave of whispers rose from the crowd, Gemma blinked. With an unhappy scowl on his face, he said. As I've told the last time, I am the leader of both hunters and pathfinders. Any crime they commit while performing their duties is my crime, so I will be the one to answer for it. Are you sure you want to challenge me, kid? Sunny held his breath, knowing that Neff's next words would decide their fates. Despite the older man's heavy tone, she did not even flinch. However, she did pierce him with a cold gaze, then slowly shook her head. I'm not here to accuse him of murdering the young man from the outer settlement. I'm here to accuse him of theft. Andal has lost a considerable amount of soul shards while gambling, but refused to pay. That is stealing. Since it was done on his private time and not while performing any official duties, you have nothing to do with it. Gemma stared at her, a bewildered look written clearly on his face. Sunny was doing the same. Well, that was unexpected. Kind of ingenious, actually. Who knew Neff can be so crafty? By shifting the accusation from a crime committed during a hunt to a misdemeanor that had nothing to do with Andal's role as a pathfinder, she effectively prevented any of the lieutenants from fighting on his behalf. At least if they remained true to their claim of being just. But was a seasoned pathfinder any less of a threat than one of Gunlog's proxies? And would Gemma even allow a challenge like that to proceed? As though responding to his questions, the tall hunter raised his eyebrows and said in disbelief. What? A gambling debt. You want to? Did Aiko send you? Nephise shook her head again. No. I've never even met her. Everyone in the Grand Hall looked at her as though she was insane. The charismatic lieutenant was no exception. With some exasperation finding its way into his voice, he asked. If you don't even know the person Andal owes the shards, why are you here challenging him on her behalf? Neff simply shrugged. Do I need to personally know the victim of the crime to punish the criminal? Gemma stared, clearly finding the whole situation ridiculous. That it's just a gambling debt. I can pay the shards myself, and we all can. However, Changing Star interrupted him. Her voice was still inexplicably calm and even. It's not about shards. It's about justice, and law. After all, the law is our only guiding star in this dark world. Without its light, there's only darkness. Her words echoed in the Grand Hall and put a grim expression on Gemma's face. By repeating what Gunlog had said here a few days prior, she left him with little choice but to satisfy the request for a challenge. After all, going against it would be tantamount to going against the Bright Lord's will. How devious. Did she learn that from me? The hunter looked away with regret, remained silent for some time, and then said to one of the guards in a dark tone. Go and bring Andal here. Tell that bastard that after he kills this stupid girl, he and I will have a long conversation about his life choices. Then, he glanced at Neff and said. And you, say your goodbyes and prepare for battle. Oh, right. What is your name? Tell us. That way, you will at least be remembered. Looking him right in the eyes, Nephi stayed quiet for a bit, and then answered. Her clear voice resounded loudly in the Grand Hall. I am Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan. Suddenly, everything became silent. Chapter 154 Light of the Seven. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Everyone grew quiet. Even Gemma seemed to be slightly stunned by that proclamation. The only person to not react to it at all was Castor, who had entered the Grand Hall a bit earlier and was now standing by one of the walls, watching Nephise with a complex expression. Her full name was shocking to hear for two entirely different, but equally earth-shattering reasons. Firstly, she had called herself not by a human name, but by a true one. In the entire history of human civilization, only a handful of awakened had managed to earn a true name in their first nightmare. Needless to say, none of them was among the 1,000 sleepers currently trapped on the Forgotten Shore. Even Gunlog himself did not have one. But Nephice did, and Sunny too, of course, but no one had to know that. Secondly, she had announced herself to be a legacy, and not just any legacy at that, but one from the legendary Immortal Flame clan. A clan that had been responsible for propelling the entire human species forward not once, but twice, first by helping conquer the second nightmare, then the third. A combination of these facts was enough to set off a metaphorical explosion in the middle of the Dark City. If this was true, then she could be considered to be an almost messianic existence here on the Forgotten Shore. Suddenly, the calmness with which she dared to challenge a fearsome pathfinder to a battle to the death did not seem that strange. The dazed looks in the eyes of all the sleepers gathered in the grand hall had slowly begun to give place to a subtle, tentative, weak glow. It was as though a tiny seed of hope was suddenly planted in the dead soil of their lightless, forlorn souls. Either by accident or on purpose, Nephice chose that exact moment to summon her armor. Numerous sparks of light surrounded her in a whirlpool of soft radiance, and when they were gone, a striking black and white armor had appeared on her graceful body. Everyone's eyes were immediately glued to the symbol on its breastplate. On it, 7 shining stars were intricately engraved into the strange white metal. That symbol. Its starlight crest. The crest of the 7. Just like Sunny, many of the inhabitants of the bright castle were familiar with the symbol of the 7 stars. Not only was it carved into the robe of the giant statue standing in front of the impregnable city wall, it was also often depicted in numerous stone carvings decorating the walls of the ancient fortress. It seemed to represent the 7 heroes that had once vowed to vanquish the darkness consuming this cursed land, and lead its people back into the light. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his spine. What is she doing? Is it all a coincidence, or did Nephice plan everything? Does she not understand how these fools will react to such theatrics? If they get the wrong idea and start running their mouths about how she is some sort of a heavenly savior, Gunlog will soon come knocking on our doors. What did Neph say? Just follow her lead and try to look virtuous. Sunny stared at her back, stumped. How would he even do that? There had never been a single drop of virtue in his entire body. Meanwhile, Gemma had finally managed to compose himself and threw an evaluating look at Changing Star. If there had been nothing but neglect and disregard in his eyes before, now there was a hint of dark wariness in them. Slowly, the leader of hunters smiled. Ah. In that case, nice to meet you. I must say, it's a very impressive name you have there. Makes one wonder where it came from. The implication behind these words was easy to understand. Gemma was insinuating that Nephice was lying. It seemed as though this insinuation had removed a veil from everyone's eyes. Most people quickly lost their wistful expressions, once again looking at her either somberly or with dark anticipation. Only now, there were also hints of mocking disdain on some of their faces. And yet, several of them were still staring at her with expressions full of hesitant, timid faith. Changing Star did not react to any of that in any way. She simply remained calm and indifferent. As though she existed slightly apart from the dirt and despair of this world. Soon, Andal the Pathfinder was led into the grand hall. The Pathfinder was of average height and solid build, with menacing blue eyes and a sharp jaw. His head was shaved on the sides, with the remaining hair weaved into a short braid. He appeared to be slightly older than the rest of the sleepers gathered in the grand hall, with the exception of Gemma himself. Andal was probably around 20.4 years old. He looked like a skilled, seasoned, and ruthless fighter. Every Pathfinder was nothing less than an elite among elites, and he was no exception. Even those who hated Andal stared at him with fear and respect, even veneration. Entering the hall, Andal threw a dark look at Nephice and walked forward to the base of the steps leading to the white throne. There, he stopped and bowed, showing his respect to the leader of hunters. I'm here. Gemma stared at him with an irritated, contemptuous expression, and then sighed. You know why I've summoned you? The Pathfinder smirked. Some wench wants to challenge me. Good. I was very sad to let Harus have all the fun last time. Several angry whispers sounded from the crowd, but no one dared to reveal their hatred toward the arrogant murderer openly. The corner of Gemma's mouth turned downward. He remained silent for some time, and then said in a dangerous tone. Fun. Did you say fun? Well, Andal, if you lacked excitement in your life, you should have just told me. How about this? After you kill that girl, I will show you what real fun is. With that, he gestured to the guards that the fight could begin. Andal frowned a little, but then turned around with a dark smile on his lips. Sunny and Cassie were led to the side, where they joined the crowd of spectating sleepers. By that point, there was a considerable amount of them gathered in the grand hall. Everyone looked at the fearsome Pathfinder and Nephice with a mix of tension and anticipation. Some were here just to see a macabre show, waiting with excitement for blood to flow. To them, it didn't matter who lived and who died, although none believed that the girl from the outer settlement had any chance of surviving in a duel against the experienced Pathfinder. Others wanted to see Andal punished for his crimes. But even these people seemed to believe that Neph was doomed to die. They just hoped that she would manage to make the bastard bleed a little before she did. Perhaps only Sunny, Cassie, and Castor knew that the result of this fight was not as predictable as everyone seemed to think. Not wasting any time, Andal summoned his weapon and walked toward Changing Star. In his hand, a vicious, crudely forged falchion suddenly gleamed with polished luster, its edge turning sharper than that of a razor. With a shudder, Sunny realized that not even the Starlight Legion armor would stop such a blade. The Pathfinder's movements were soft and deceptive, betraying years of experience in bloody battles against both nightmare creatures and humans. The dark smile had never left his lips, and there was bloodlust burning in his eyes. After years spent hunting monsters, he looked like a monster himself. However, Nephice just stood there calmly and watched him approach, not even trying to summon her sword. What is she doing? Trying to mimic Harus. When the distance between them shortened to that of only several steps, everyone held their breaths. Suddenly, Andal flourished his cleaver and lunged forward with astonishing, almost inhuman speed. His push was so powerful that dust flew into the air from under the soles of his boots. Sunny clenched his fists. What is she? Just a fraction of a second before the magically enhanced blade cleaved her apart, Nephice suddenly sidestepped the strike and threw her arms into the air, simultaneously summoning her longsword. The ethereal sparks of light passed through the blade of Andal's falchion, forming into silvery steel only on the other side of it. The Pathfinder's eyes widened. Forever. Without anything separating it from the enemy's flesh, the long sword that had just formed from the thin air behind the falchion bit into his neck, cleanly severing Andal's head from his shoulders. As blood shot into the air from the Pathfinder's neck, his head rolled on the floor like a macabre ball and stopped near the steps that led to Gunlog's white throne. It seemed as though all oxygen was suddenly sucked out of the great hall. In the deathly silence, Andal's body heavily fell on the white marble. Everyone was staring at Nephice in utter disbelief, the sleepers, the guards, even Gemma. Honestly, Sunny himself was a bit stunned. Of course, he had suspected that Changing Star might win the duel. But even he did not expect that she would kill an actual Pathfinder, one of the most fearsome warriors in the Bright Castle, with just one strike. Dismissing her sword with a cold expression on her face, Nephice walked over to the marble steps, picked up the severed head by the hair, and looked up at the leader of the hunters. Then, with a well-practiced polite smile, she said. "Oh. It was nice to meet you too." Chapter 155 First Recruits. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The blood was still dripping from Andal's severed head when they left the castle. Nephice was holding it by the hair, her face as indifferent as always. It seemed as though carrying human heads was not even something worthy of changing facial expressions. Suddenly, Sunny saw Changing Star in a new light. It was a long time since he had last been wary of her, but now, he was starting to wonder. Just how many people had she killed in the past? The facial expressions of everyone else, though, ranged from astonishment to horror. People who had witnessed the duel stared at Nephise as though she was some sort of an avenging angel. The others treated her like a terrifying demon. I wonder. How much soul's essence had she absorbed with this one kill? Has to be a lot, right? But those were just the inhabitants of the castle. The reactions of the people of the outer settlement were strangely reserved, but even more intense. They had never seen one of them stroll into the ancient fortress and walk away freely with a severed head of a pathfinder in their hands. Now, all of them were watching silently, an inexorable, dark, sweltering emotion burning in their eyes. All of it made Sunny very uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if Nephise knew what kind of a storm her stunt had evoked in the hearts of these people. That sort of emotion was dangerous and almost impossible to control. If she didn't know, things could turn really bad really quickly. But it was even worse if she did, and had done it on purpose. Was Neph really capable of such ingenious and effective manipulation? Was this her plan all along? Sunny wasn't sure that he knew this side of Changing Star. Come to think of it, he didn't really know that much about her at all. Consumed by these doubts, Sunny didn't even notice that they were already in front of Effie's cabin. He glanced at the sky, only to see the sun hiding behind the ominous silhouette of the crimson spire. It was evening, just like Nephise had promised. Scary. The unruly huntress opened the door before they even knocked, a hint of irritation in her eyes. What's with all the commotion? Can't a girl spend a day in? Noticing the three of them, she froze. Without so much as batting an eye, Nephise simply threw Andel's head to Effie's feet and asked. Can we talk now? Looking down at the macabre present, the huntress narrowed her eyes. Her face darkened. A few moments later, she glanced up and said in a grim voice. Come inside. As soon as the door closed behind them, Effie asked in a furious whisper. What the hell have you done, princess? Nephise tilted her head and slightly frowned. Then, she said with a hint of sincere confusion in her voice. You wanted me to prove my strength. Did you not? The huntress stared at her in disbelief. Misunderstanding her silence, Neph blinked, then added. Oh. That head belonged to. I know whose head it is. Where did you get it? Sunny sighed and slumped heavily on one of the sturdy chests. Then he forced out a dark smile and said. Oh, by the way, you might be the last human in the Dark City to learn this, but standing right in front of you is none other than Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, the champion of justice. She just walked into the castle, challenged the bastard, and killed him with one strike of her sword, right under everyone's eyes. By now, this must be the only thing people are talking about. His tone lacked any kind of amusement. If anything, it seemed as though Sunny was just barely stopping himself from cursing out loud. Why did trouble have to follow him everywhere he went? While Neph and Cassie were anxiously waiting for Effie's response, Sunny just stared at his shadow, hoping to find some sympathy. Sadly, there wasn't any to be found. The shadow was just staring back at him, full of jubilant gloating. Effie, meanwhile, blinked a couple of times and looked at them with a strange expression. That's right. Run while you can. Then, she threw her head back and laughed out loud. Oh. Oh, gods. Did you really? This is priceless. I wish I'd seen their faces. Sunny watched her with his mouth wide open. That was not the reaction he had been expecting. Crazy, they're all crazy. I'm surrounded by crazy people. When Effie finished laughing, she glanced at Changing Star with a dark, but gleeful expression. All right, you have proven your point. But there's something you should know. Back when I refused to join the host, Gunlog made it clear that if he can't have me, no one else will. Ever since, any group that dared to invite me to join them ended up regretting their decision. By hiring me as a guide, you will be putting yourself in his crosshairs. Are you sure you want to do this? So there was more to her story. No wonder she was so solitary. In the ensuing silence, Sunny was the first one to speak. His voice sounded bitter and dejected. I mean, it's a bit late to worry about that. Don't you think? The next morning, they were preparing to go on a hunt. A small crowd of slum dwellers gathered around to see them off, their dark eyes burning with a strange mix of hope and anguish. By now, the story of Changing Star's clever ruse and heroic battle against villainous Pathfinder Andal had already flown all over the place, growing more and more unbelievable with each retelling. Now, these people came to witness her with their own eyes. They were especially interested in the Starlight Legion armor and the symbol engraved on its breastplate. Who knew that the memory of a simple Carapace centurion would have such an effect on the inhabitants of the Dark City? Sunny was not happy about it at all. The previous evening, he had a chance to ask Nephice a few questions after they had returned to their lodge. However, he kept most of them to himself, not knowing how to properly express his feelings. In the end, he only asked about how she had managed to defeat her human opponent, who was much more powerful in terms of physical prowess, so easily. Changing Star's answer was very simple. She just shrugged and said, "An old legacy trick." Which pretty much explained everything and nothing at all. And now, they were going into the Dark City to hunt monsters. When the four of them were ready to set off, a sudden hum of voices made them turn around. The slum dwellers stepped aside, letting a tall young man walk through. Sunny frowned. Great. What is he doing here? Walking closer, Castor stopped a few meters away from them and gave a polite bow. Lady Nephice, Huntress Athena, Kasha, Sunny. Good morning to all of you. I, Castor of the Hanley clan, would like to join your hunting party. Will you have me? Everyone grew quiet for a few moments. Despite Sunny's dislike of the handsome legacy, having him on their side would be an incredible boon. Genius fighters like Castor were hard to come by anywhere, let alone on the Forgotten Shore. He felt torn. A buzz of whispers rose from the crowd. People were shocked to see a warrior from the castle volunteering to join an outer settlement cohort. And one of such fearsome reputation, too. After some time had passed, Changing Star simply shrugged. If you want. Just like that, the proud scion of the Hanley clan had become the fifth member of their hunting party. It was strange to see their numbers grow after months spent alone in the labyrinth, but that was probably inevitable. What else did Sunny expect? That it would be just the three of them forever. Stupid. Together, the five sleepers left the slum of the outer settlement behind and stepped on the road of white stone that lead into the cursed ruins. And just like that, the fates of every human in the Dark City were sealed. The end had begun. Chapter 156 Free Lunch. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Their first hunt was surprisingly uneventful. Guided by an experienced pathfinder and augmented by Sunny's stealthy shadow, they managed to avoid any fallen creatures and arrive at the destination in one piece. There, the group hid in the ruins and waited for their prey to show up. The plan of battle was discussed beforehand. After Effie had described the type of monster they were here to kill, complete with a detailed list of its strengths and weaknesses, Nephice quickly assigned different roles to different people. Sunny had expected that things would work just like back in the labyrinth, but to his surprise, they did not. Just like before, Neph was going to take most of the risk and lure the enemy into revealing its vulnerability. However, Castor was going to be the one to make use of it and deal the fatal blow, not Sunny. Which made sense, really. After all, his ability was not a combat one, at least not officially. It was rational to entrust the role to someone with an incredibly powerful combat ability, as the one Castor possessed. Still, for some reason, Sunny felt angry about it. It felt as though he was being replaced. Not wishing to appear childish, he swallowed his bitterness and remained silent. When the monster did show up, everything went perfectly. Nephice and Castor were able to finish the creature off without sustaining any injuries. Their teamwork, while not effortless, was strangely harmonious, probably because both were legacies and had received similar kind of training. Sunny, whose task was to join the fray if things went wrong, ended up not having to lift a finger. Neither did Effie, who simply stayed with Cassie in case the blind girl needed protection. After everything was over, she laughed. "Ha, this is the easiest meal I've ever earned." Effie's status in the party was a bit strange. Unlike the rest of them, she had not shown any desire to join the cohort officially. Instead, she was somewhat of a hired worker. Her responsibilities included guiding the party through the ruins and providing them with information, and nothing else. She wasn't even required to fight side by side with them. After the nightmare creature was dead, they quickly butchered it and left the scene of the battle loaded with a heavy weight of meat. Before the shadow of the Crimson Spire fell on the dark city, the cohort was already approaching the marble arch at the base of the hill. This was when something unexpected finally happened. And it happened because of Nephice. After giving a fair share of the spoils to the vigorous huntress, she glanced at Sunny, Cassie, and Castor. Then, Changing Star said, "I would like for you three to entrust me with your part of the meat." "What? What is that about?" Before Sunny had an opportunity to ask a question, Cassie already smiled and said, "Of course, Neph." Castor did not linger either. With a small bow, he nodded. "As you wish, Lady Nephice." Sunny gritted his teeth. After that, he would have looked like a complete jerk if he were to start interrogating her. Especially because, technically, he had not done anything except for lending his shadow to Effie. Nephice and Castor were the ones who had actually risked their lives. "Fine." Nephice gave them a nod and continued walking up the white road. When they returned to the outer settlement, she separated the remaining share of monster meat into two parts. One, much smaller part, she handed to Cassie. The other, incomparably larger part, she simply placed on the white stones in front of their lodge. Effie looked at the whole process with curiosity. So did the slum dwellers who had gathered to welcome them back. Sunny frowned. "What are you doing?" Changing Star glanced at him and then gestured to the small bundle of meat in Cassie's hands. "This is for us to sustain ourselves. We will eat that meat until our next hunt." Somebody from the crowd shouted. "What about the rest? Are you selling it? What is your price?" It was customary for the outer settlement hunters to sell some of their spoils. That was how people here fed themselves. The meat could be exchanged for items, services, or, in very rare cases, actual shards. Neph turned to the people who had gathered around and looked at them with a frown. When everyone grew quiet, she said in a cold tone, "My hunting party will not be selling any meat. Ever." Before anyone had time to react, dismayed by that answer, she took a step to the side, gestured to the large pile of meat, and said, "Instead, we will be giving it away for free." A dead silence hung above the edge of the outer settlement. The slum dwellers who had come to catch a glimpse of Changing Star or in hope of procuring some food were all looking at Nephice with a dark mix of mistrust, disbelief, and suspicion. After a while, someone shouted, "What trick are you trying to play? People here are hungry, Changing Star. Shame on you." Nephice crossed her arm, furrowed her brow, and answered, "There is no trick. Everyone is free to take a small share of the meat to fill their stomach." The young man who had accused her before laughed. "Why would you just hand it out for free? Do you think that we're fools?" Sunny was being tormented by the same question. He often joked about Neph's foolish nobility, but he also knew that she wasn't really stupid. She always had a reason for everything she did, even if those reasons sometimes seemed insane to him. Lately, he even started to suspect that Neff was much more cynical and pragmatic than he had ever given her credit for. It's just that her version of cynicism was very different from his own. What was she doing? Meanwhile, Nephi's pierced the shouter with a cold look, scowled, and said, a hint of anger in her voice. Why? Am I not a human? Are you not humans? Does a human need a reason to help others of her kind in this cursed place? She took a step forward and looked at the gathered people, making them shiver under her heavy gaze. Shame on me. No. Shame on you all for forgetting who you are. We are people, not beasts. In the real world or in the dream realm, this is who we are. Her words echoed above the white stones, mixing with the howling wind. Now come forward and take some food if you're hungry. The slum dwellers were still not convinced. However, their hunger was stronger than their wariness. Soon, the first of them stepped forward, tentatively took a small strip of meat, threw a furtive glance at Nephis, and then hurriedly walked away. When the others saw that nothing happened to him, they became braver. Young men and women dressed in rags formed a messy line. One by one, they came forward, received their tiny piece of meat, and then disappeared with haste, afraid that it will be taken back. Slowly, a new kind of light appeared on their faces. It was the same timid, weak emotion that Sunny had noticed in the eyes of the castle inhabitants after Neff had announced her name. It was something that precipitated hope, or maybe faith. With a dark expression on his face, Sunny looked up, at the tiny silhouettes of guards observing them from the walls of the magnificent fortress. Nephis was right when she said that they were all still people. However, she was wrong about everything else. Because people were much worse than beasts, that he did not like what was happening at all. Chapter 157 Wind of Change. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After that day, things moved with a speed that left Sunny disoriented. It was as though he was being pulled forward by an overpowering current, helpless to slow down or change direction. Before he could react to one change, another would happen, making him feel like he was losing control. Everything was happening so fast that he found it difficult to adjust. It was hard not to fear that, eventually, he would simply be left behind. After that first hunt where Nephis had chosen to give most of the spoils away, she led them on several more. Not all of those hunts went as smoothly, but they did manage to return victorious, if a little battered. Every time, she paid Effie her share of the meat, took a small amount for them to consume, and gave the rest to the people of the outer settlement free of charge. Because of how little their own share was, the group was forced to hunt every other day instead of once or twice a month. Sunny did not understand at all why they were taking on all that unnecessary risk. Provided, he wasn't exposed to many risks himself. Apart from a couple of short battles where Neff and Castor ended up requiring some backup, he spent most of his time with Effie, serving as her scout and slowly learning the ins and outs of the dark city from her. With the well of knowledge that the unruly huntress possessed and his nimble shadow, the party rarely met anything they weren't ready to face. This gave them an incredible advantage over all other hunting parties of the outer settlement, and even some of Gunlog's own. Soon, their flawless and intense track record earned the cohort reputation and renown. They weren't seen as newcomers anymore. Instead, people considered them to be nothing short of the strongest hunters in the slum. Many even believed that Changing Star and her people were in no way inferior to the hunters of the Bright Castle. Nephis herself was known to be a fearsome fighter ever since her dramatic duel with Andal. Effie had the reputation as one of the outer settlement's best from a long time ago. Handsome and capable Castor quickly won respect and adoration thanks to his amiable personality, noble bearing, and skill. The three of them were considered to be the core of the party, with Cassie and Sunny existing somewhere on the periphery. People loved Cassie because Neff had entrusted her with the responsibility of handing out the free meat, and also because it was nearly impossible not to love this sweet, exquisitely beautiful, and tragic girl. For most of the slum dwellers, she was the welcoming face of the cohort. Sunny, on the other hand, no one really paid him any attention. With no valiant feats of vanquishing monsters of the Dark City under his belt, most considered him to be a mere support member of the party. Inconsequential at best, a charity case at worst. If they even remembered his existence. Sunny was simultaneously happy to live in obscurity and secretly infuriated by this lack of recognition. It was good that no one suspected how powerful he really was. And yet, watching everyone fall over themselves in Castor's presence while completely ignoring his own made Sunny want to kill something. Or someone. Especially because, due to the tactical composition of the cohort, Nephi spent most of her time with the handsome Legacy. They seemed to work especially well together. When this frustration threatened to overwhelm Sunny, he would go away, find a quiet corner, and train his katas until every muscle in his body hurt. Usually, the whistle of the midnight shard's blade cutting air was enough to calm him. He trained his swordsmanship day after day, finding strange comfort in it. At least this was something he could control. Of course, Sunny was never entirely relaxed. In fact, with each day, he grew more and more anxious. Because other things were changing as well. After each hunt, Changing Star would provide the dwellers of the slum with free food. At first, they treated her with distrust, then with gratitude, and finally with something akin to reverence. The strange light that Sunny had noticed in their eyes after that first time was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Some people even started jokingly calling her Saint Nephis, as though she was some sort of an angel. However, he felt that these words strangely contained less and less humor with each day. It was really very creepy, not to mention dangerous. The more people looked at Neph like she was their personal savior, the more he feared how drastic Gunlog's reaction would be. If history had shown anything, it was that kings never went easy on meddling messiahs. And throughout all of that, the same question continued to torment Sunny. Was all of this an accident, or had Nephis done it on purpose? As time went by, more and more random people joined their group. They weren't hunters, just forlorn young men and women from the outer settlement who wanted to help. They tended to monster hides that the cohort brought back from the hunts, maintained various tools and gear that needed to be used, assisted Cassie with handing out food, and did other kinds of small but useful things. Soon, the ramshackle lodge was full of them. Sunny didn't even know all of their names. It seemed as though every day, someone new would appear, acting as if they had always been a part of the group. What's worse, not all of them seemed to know who he was, either. No once and not twice, someone would smile at him and ask in a friendly tone. "Are you new?" Of course, bastards never said the same thing to Castor. Sunny felt like he was slowly becoming a stranger in his own home. The feeling was rather unpleasant, not to mention how perfectly it fit all his insecurities. What's worse, these new people really made him uncomfortable. He wasn't really sure of whether they were Changing Star's helpers, or if they were her followers. Were they loyal, or devout? One night after a couple of weeks of this, he was suddenly woken by Cassie tugging on his sleeve. The blind girl was whispering. "Sunny. Wake up." A moment later, he was already on his feet, ready to summon the midnight shard. A light coming from the other room told him that Neph was awake, too. "Gunlog. Did someone betray us? What's wrong?" Cassie covered the candle she was holding in her hand and answered in a worried voice. Something is coming from the road. I've dreamt of it. A nightmare creature." Knowing what had to be done, Sunny simply nodded, gripped her shoulder for reassurance, and walked over to meet Nephis. Since their lodge was on the edge of the slum, right in front of the entrance of the ancient road, they had no choice but to fight. That night, the three of them, Changing Star, Sunny, and Castor, battled a devil that had wandered up the hill and fought it off before it could reach the outer settlement. When dawn came, terrified people walked out of their hovels on shaking legs and saw the horrible marks left on the white stones by the beast's claws, as well as puddles of blood, both human and that of a monster, steaming in the morning cold. They also saw Changing Star leaning tiredly on her silver sword. Sunny, who was sitting with his back against the wall of the lodge and breathing heavily, was looking at her, too. Back when he was describing to Nephice why Gunlog could never be defeated, he had told her that every facet of life here was under his control. Food, safety, hope, fear, even power itself. Now, Changing Star had given these people food. By protecting the outer settlement, she had given them safety. She had even given them hope. There was also the fear that the inhabitants of the castle felt after Neff had easily beheaded one of their pathfinders. All that remained was power. Finally, the question that pressed heavily on his mind had an answer. No, none of this was a coincidence. Everything that had happened, from choosing the outermost building in the slum as their base to insisting on giving away the food for free, was part of Changing Star's strange but methodical plan. She knew what she was doing all along. But why was she doing all this? What was her ultimate goal? Uneasy, Sunny stared at Nephice and wondered about the future. Chapter 158 Invisible. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After about a month of living in the outer settlement, Sunny woke up one morning with the feeling of not belonging anywhere in this world. This familiar feeling had pursued him for most of his life, and had returned recently after being gone for some time. With a sigh, he rose from his narrow cot and summoned the puppeteer's shroud. The stone lodge was already full of sounds and voices. The tempting smell of breakfast filled the air. Coming out of his small room, Sunny saw a bunch of Neff's helpers rushing here and there, busy with various tasks. Some of them stopped to greet him, others did not. He paid no attention to them and went outside to wash his face and take a look at the sky. The gray sky of the forgotten shore looked as it always did. Nothing ever really changed in this loathsome hell. On his way back, Sunny noticed a gaunt figure standing hesitantly near the doors of the lodge. The ragged young man looked very familiar. Reaching into his memory, Sunny identified him as the friendly, but nervous receptions from the castle. His clothes were much less clean and tidy than they had been before, and his face had become even thinner. The young man had clearly seen better days. What is he doing there? Coming closer, Sunny called out to the young man. Harper, right. How come you're here? Harper flinched, then looked at him with anxious eyes. Oh. Sunless. It's so nice to see you. Sunny stared at him for a while, then asked bluntly. Did they kick you out of the castle? Harper's face instantly fell. Lowering his gaze, he stayed silent for a few moments and then said quietly. I haven't been able to pay the tribute anymore. So, yes. I guess they did. Then he glanced up, hesitated, and asked in a weak voice. I heard that I can get some food here. Sunny tried to give him a reassuring smile. Sure. Usually, we give out meat after the hunts. But if you're hungry right now, I'm certain there's something we can do. Just talk to, a girl with red hair. She's in charge of breakfast, I think. Harper smiled, too, the weak light of hope igniting in his eyes. Really? They will just give me a meal for free. Sunny shrugged. Why not? We have enough food right now. Most of those guys and girls are always here, anyway. They're like guests that won't doesn't matter. They help around, doing this and that, to express their gratitude, I guess. If you feel guilty just eating for free, ask them for some chore. This might not be the bright castle, but you'll see that life here can be not bad as well. Guiding the gaunt young man inside, Sunny directed him toward the kitchen inside. Even castle dwellers were now coming to their lodge. If this went on, he would have to share his room with some random stranger. What a joke. Entering the main hall, he noticed Nephice and Castor standing near the window, discussing the approaching hunt. This morning, there were several hunters from other parties surrounding them. The cohort had been planning a big joint hunt for a while now, and today was the day. Did they just start without me? Hiding his discontent, Sonny walked over to the group of hunters and greeted them. Castor smiled at him, while Nephi simply nodded. The other hunters glanced at the new arrival and didn't pay him much attention. Fools! If you knew who stands before you. Consoling himself with these childish thoughts, Sonny listened to the discussion. One of the hunters was speaking. South of the collapsed lighthouse is a good choice, but the awakened creatures living there have an incredibly sharp hearing. Attacking them in large numbers won't be easy. In the past month, their lodge had gone through a transformation. The remnants of broken furniture were long gone and replaced. Some of the new pieces of furniture came from the ruins, some were made right here by the craftsmen of the outer settlement. There were monster hides and decorations hung on the walls, making the space look neat and presentable. These days, the lodge appeared as the headquarters of a small, but prosperous awakened cohort. There was even a large map of the Dark City on one of the walls, with various symbols marking all kinds of useful information. Currently, the hunter was pointing at a particular spot on the map. This spot right here is much more promising. Blood fiends are known to dwell in these parts. They hibernate during the day, so if we manage to find a lair or two. Castor shook his head. The area you're suggesting is too close to the territory of those strange living statues. We all know how formidable those bizarre creatures are. I still think that south of the lighthouse is better. We just need to think of a way to deceive the hearing of the monsters. Suddenly finding something that he could be helpful with, Sonny said. I have a bell that can. However, his voice drowned in the buzz of the conversation. No one paid attention to his words. Embarrassed, Sonny inhaled deeply, waited for a few seconds, and spoke again. Actually, we can use one of my two sound-producing memories too. But right at that moment, Castor seemed to come up with a brilliant idea. Everyone listened to him, turning their backs to Sonny. It was as though he was completely invisible. What's even the damn point? Sonny stood there for a minute or two, feeling awkward, angry, and utterly stupid. Then he simply turned around and walked away. Finding his way to the roof of the lodge, he climbed on top of the second-story addition and sat there, solemnly watching as the sun slowly climbed up. After a while, Sonny sighed and closed his eyes, letting the shadow slip back into the building. Just as he had expected, no one even noticed his absence. Not surprised, he sent the shadow around the lodge, watching all the people who were busy making Neff's mysterious plans happen. Everyone seemed full of energy, enthusiasm, and a sense of belonging. Why was he the only one who couldn't fit in? Even that guy from the castle, Harper, had already found some friends. He was currently helping the red-haired girl who was in charge of breakfast wash the dishes. Sonny frowned. Something wasn't quite right with Harper. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the gaunt young man seemed a little off, somehow. Forgetting all about his bad mood, Sonny concentrated on watching the timid sleeper. Harper seemed to do just what any newcomer would do. Helping people, learning their names, and asking questions about how things worked in the Changing Stars party. It seemed as though he wanted very badly to stay in the lodge and become useful. Which was understandable. But something was wrong. Sonny's suspicions were confirmed when, about an hour later, Harper left the lodge and went back into the slum. With the shadow stealthily following him from behind, the gaunt young man made sure that no one saw him and hurriedly dove into a secluded alley. Deep in the darkness of that alley, a man was waiting for him. Sonny frowned, recognizing one of the high-ranking guards from the castle. So that's what all this is about. The guard, meanwhile, glared at Harper and asked in a rough, unfriendly tone. Well. Harper looked down, his fear and anxiousness apparent. Yes, sir. I've done what you told me. It wasn't very hard. The guard smiled. Good. It seems that you really do want to return to the castle. Harper glanced up, a desperate light igniting in his eyes. Really? So. I can return. Even though I don't have any shards to pay the tribute. The smile disappeared from the guard's face. You will be able to return after you gather all the information that I told you to learn. If you do, I'll invite you inside myself. No need to even worry about the tribute. But remember, I need to know everything about the core members of the cohort, including Saint Nephis herself. Their aspects, their abilities, their flaws. I even want to know what hand they use to wipe. Understand? Harper paled. But, sir, things like that, it won't be easy to learn them. Especially for a simple servant like me. The guard frowned. Didn't you say that you knew 2 of the cohort members already? This is why I gave you this chance to begin with. Did you lie to me, boy? The gaunt young man flinched. No. No, I do know them. I actually spoke with Lady Changing Stars Scout already. He is a friend of mine. A wide, menacing smile appeared on the guard's face. What's the problem? Just get that fool talking. Rats like him will tell you everything as long as you pay them a little attention, believe me. I'm willing to bet that this useless freeloader is walking around full of jealousy and delusions of grandeur. Pretend to respect him even a little, and he won't be able to shut up. Ouch. Harper nodded, then suddenly hesitated. After a few moments of silence, he asked in a timid voice. Sir, you won't hurt them, will you? They are good people. The guard stared at him for a second or two, then said in a dark, mocking tone. Why do you ask if you already know the answer? Hearing those words, Harper deflated. His face darkened, and he lowered his head, as though ashamed to look straight. However, he didn't object. That bastard. Just wait and see. Sonny was already planning the beating he was going to give the cowardly young man before throwing him out of the lodge, but at that moment, a voice called out for him. It was Effie. Hey, doofus. Are you asleep? Come down, the hunt is starting. Torn away from the shadow's perspective, Sonny threw a dark glance at the tall huntress, called his shadow back, and sighed. I'll deal with him after we return. But by the time he returned, Sonny was in no state to deal with anything. Chapter 159 Revelation. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Despite all his misgivings and unease, Sonny had never expected that this hunt was going to change everything. He was just going through the motions, somewhat on edge because of the scale of this joint operation, but also strangely reassured by the large number of hunters surrounding him. The unusual hunting party left the outer settlement at noon, heading east, to the massive ruin of a collapsed lighthouse that was situated at the edge of the city. There were almost 20 of them gathered together, all carefully making their way through the deadly maze of narrow streets, with Effie serving as the chief pathfinder and Sonny helping her by scouting ahead. The plan was as straightforward and simple as possible. However, nothing was really ever safe in the dark city. Everyone was prepared for the worst. And pretty soon, their fears came true. Halfway to their destination, a sudden sound made Effie freeze in place. Raising a fist to signal everyone to stop, she peered into the fog, a dark and foreboding expression on her face. Feeling that something bad was about to happen, Sonny commanded his shadow to return and moved closer to Cassie. His hand was ready to grasp the hilt of the midnight shard out of the air. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Then, Effie's pupils suddenly widened. Scatter. As soon as the word left her mouth, the experienced hunters dashed in different directions. Sonny himself grabbed Cassie and lunged to the side, dragging her along with him. Then, something large and heavy crashed from above into the cobblestones where the sleepers had been standing just a second ago. Luckily, most of them were already somewhere else due to Effie's timely warning. However, a couple of people were a little late to react. Their screams drowned in the sickening sound of tearing flesh. Sonny cursed. His shadow was nowhere near yet, leaving him with no choice but to fight without its aid. He spun around, summoning the midnight shard, and froze for a fraction of a second, all blood draining from his face. Out there in the middle of the street, a massive, winged creature was standing on the cracked cobblestones, its pale body in black feather stained by the blood of the unfortunate hunters. Its terrifying beak was open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-dot-like fangs. A Spire messenger. As Sunny watched, momentarily paralyzed by fear, a long red tongue snaked out of the creature's maw to lick the blood off its face. Move! Shaking off the paralysis, Sunny gripped his sword and prepared to fight for his life. His and Cassie's. After that, everything happened incredibly fast, but also felt like an eternity. The hunters had a simple choice to make. Either separate into smaller groups and retreat into the ruins, risking encountering something equally as or even more terrifying, or stand their ground and try to drive the fallen beast away. Without having to discuss it, everyone chose the second option. No matter how dangerous, a familiar enemy was always better than the unknown. Unknown. The surviving hunters attacked the abomination with all they had. Even though their memories had no chance of breaking through the skin of the terrible creature, each strike still hurt it. Those who had aspect abilities capable of dealing direct damage immediately used them, hoping to at least disorient the beast. Of course, no ability of a sleeper could ever hope to wound a fallen beast. However, if their assault was ferocious enough, the messenger could retreat to search for easier prey. If it only made the abomination angrier, however, most of them were going to die. More than anything, trying to resist creatures of this rank was nothing but a gamble. For several seconds, it wasn't clear which way the situation would turn. The messenger easily shrugged off the rain of attacks and lashed out with its beak, piercing one of the hunters clean through despite the man's mighty build and heavy armor. Another was almost torn apart by terrifying talons, but at the last second, Castor managed to pull the young man away thanks to his incredible speed. Sunny waited at the back, covering Cassie and praying that his shadow would come back in time to give him a chance of dealing damage to the damned creature. But in the end, it was Effie who dealt the decisive blow. Summoning her weapon, she leaped forward. Sunny could see her lean, powerful muscles moving like wire ropes under the olive skin. As though turning into a spring, her whole body tensed, and then exploded with momentum. There was enough force behind her attack to split a mountain apart. Miraculously, the tip of her weapon managed to break the pale hide on the messenger's chest and stab deep, causing a stream of blood to shoot out. The creature screamed, and then lashed out with its powerful paws at the huntress. A large round shield appeared on Effie's left hand. Digging the soles of her sandals into the ground, she leaned forward and received the terrifying blow. The cobblestones under her feet cracked, but the huntress remained standing. Spitting a mouthful of blood, she grinned crazily and twisted her weapon, causing more damage and pain to the messenger. It seemed as if the fallen beast did not expect to meet such fierce resistance from a bunch of ants, not to mention actually being hurt by them. Letting out another scream, it waved its wings to send the sleepers flying back, picked up the dead hunters, and jumped into the air. Soon, the abomination turned into a dark spot in the skies. All that remained behind were puddles of blood, broken stones, and the moans of battered humans. Somehow, they had survived, well, most of them. Effie straightened, dismissed her shield, and glanced down. Damn. I think my arm is broken. With blood running down her chin, the huntress laughed and leaned on her weapon, visibly exhausted. Sunny wanted to congratulate her on that awesome strike, but then, something registered in his mind. Suddenly cold, he stared at Effie's weapon. He had never seen her fight before, so this was the first time Sunny saw what memory the huntress used in battle. It was a spear. An ancient, beautiful spear forged from bronze. Something clicked in his mind, disparate pieces of information connecting together. And then, everything exploded. Or at least it felt that way. Because Sunny finally understood the future. Chapter 160 The Future. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Hey, doofus. You're okay. Sonny reacted after a second or two, raising his head and staring at Effie with empty eyes. Why, yeah. I'm fine. Just, thinking about stuff. Effie gave him a strange look, then shrugged and turned away. Everyone was too busy to pay him any attention. Not that anyone ever did. Left alone, Sonny staggered and slowly lowered himself to the ground. In his mind, one phrase was repeating itself, over and over, growing louder and louder with each second. A woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monster, a woman with a bronze spear. This was a part of the vision that Cassie had seen back at the beginning of their journey, on the night they had spent atop the giant statue of a headless knight. The one that was so harrowing that she had almost jumped into the dark waters of the cursed sea just to run away from her terror. It was also the key that connected every little piece of information that Sonny knew into one cohesive picture and let him understand the true meaning of that terrifying vision. He shuddered, remembering what Cassie had told them on that dark night in stark detail. I saw the human castle again. Only this time, it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light, the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows. All that time, Sonny was sure, for some reason, that Cassie saw the cataclysm that had devoured this land and turned it into a desolate hell, creating the Forgotten Shore. The first part of the vision was certainly referring to how the curse of the all-consuming darkness had broken free from its 7 seals. So he had just assumed that the other parts of the vision spoke about the past, too. But Effie's spear gave him an epiphany, a terrible revelation that he had been wrong all this time. That the apocalyptic images Cassie had described were not of the past, but of the future. Their future. Trembling, Sonny raised his head and glanced at Nephise, who was using her powers to heal the wounded hunters, her ivory face contorted in a painful grimace. His eyes were wide and full of disbelief. It was all so clear. She was the lonely star that burned in the dark skies above the bright castle, bringing with it fire and rivers of blood. After all, her name was Changing Star. Or, depending on the runes used to write it, Star of Misfortune. The Star of Ruin. Sonny spent so much time fearing what Gunlog was going to do with Nephise, but he should have been scared of what she was going to do to him, instead. A corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, why hadn't he realized the truth after seeing the bright lord for the first time? It was him. Gunlog was the corpse in Cassie's vision. Effie was the woman drowning in the sea of monsters. The archer, Sonny didn't know yet, but he was sure that they would meet soon. Maybe only to die together. He had always known that Nephise was guided by some mysterious, overwhelming goal. He didn't know what that goal was, but it was certainly not here, on the Forgotten Shore. To achieve it, Changing Star had to find a way to return to the real world. That's why she had always been so unwavering and relentless in her ambition to move forward, overcome any obstacle, endure any pain. At times, it even seemed as though her conviction was more akin to an obsession. Nephise was willing to do anything to fulfill her dream. The comforting words she had told him on their first day in the dark city suddenly resounded in his mind. Only now, there was another, colder, and much darker meaning hiding beneath their surface. We will find a way to return. No matter what has to be done, we will. No matter what has to be done. There was only one way to leave the Forgotten Shore, and it lay in the Crimson Spire. No sleeper could ever hope to reach that gateway in one piece. They would need an army to even try. Maybe then, walking on corpses, 1 or 2 survivors would be able to escape from this cursed place. But Nephise didn't have an army. Yet. To gather one, she would need to kill Gunlog, usurp his power and eliminate all opposition, drowning the bright castle in blood. Only then would she be able to rally every single sleeper left in the dark city and lure them into following her on a suicidal crusade. Knowing all too well that most of them would die because of it. No sane person would follow her. They won't. Right. Sunny remembered the faces of the young men and women that had become part of their group in the last few weeks. The strange light of hope, or maybe faith, burning in their eyes. The almost religious reverence they felt toward Nephis, no, not Nephis. Toward Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan. Their personal angel. Were they sane, still? Finally, he understood every part of Neph's plan. Looking at the beautiful young woman with silver hair, Sunny shivered. And then, there was the last part of the prophecy. On their way back, Sunny felt as though he was in a feverish dream. The magnitude of the revelation was too much for him. His mind felt weak, unsteady, and on the verge of breaking apart. He had never experienced such a deep feeling of shock. It was as though the very core of his being was violently shaken. He wasn't equipped with the right tools to cope with it. It felt as if he was on the verge of losing it. Sunny was truly horrified. Don't waste time trying to deal with your emotions. This is not the right time for feelings. You need to figure out how all of this affects you personally, and what you need to do to turn things to your advantage. After all, what was there to be scared of? That many people would die. What did their lives and deaths have to do with him? Yes. As long as he was the one left standing in the end, this whole thing might actually turn out to be beneficial. Hadn't he spent the last weeks being afraid of what Gunnlod was going to do to them? Well, now he knew that Gunnlod was going to end up as a corpse. Problem solved. Wasn't he crushed by the news that he would spend the rest of his life in this odious hell? Well, now that wasn't a certainty anymore. That last part of the prophecy. Everything was well. Better than ever. And yet, no matter how much Sunny was trying to be rational, he just couldn't help but be filled with terror. In the crimson light of sunset, he found a reason to leave the lodge and walked to the edge of the stone platform. No one really cared that much about his whereabouts, so it wasn't hard to disappear for a while. No one noticed that something was bothering Sunny, either. They were all accustomed to his moody behavior, anyway. Only Cassie seemed to have picked up on something, and Castor, who pretended to be carefree, but actually had a habit of watching anyone close to Nephis like a hawk. The bastard. Reaching the very end of the stone platform, Sunny turned around and looked at the outer settlement and the magnificent castle towering above it, with hundreds of sleepers rushing to find shelter before the coming of night. A cold and harrowing feeling gripped his heart. All these people are going to die. Neph was going to kill them. Was he willing to help her do it? For some reason, Sunny wanted to laugh. This whole situation was so sick and appalling that it was almost ridiculous. He was never an altruistic type, really. More than that, he always prided himself on being a cynical, selfish, and vicious person. But this was too much even for him. Grabbing his head, Sunny moaned. What am I going to do? At that moment, the sound of steps suddenly attracted his attention. A gaunt figure appeared from the slum and walked toward him. Sunny frowned. Oh, right. That guy, I have completely forgotten about him. Harper stopped a few paces away and smiled timidly. Sunless. Can we talk?